Welcome back, everybody. So today we are going to be talking about stablecoin legislation. Now, this is not boring, I promise you. There's a lot of things to talk about regarding macroeconomics, the bond markets, and everything else in between. Now, I will give you the executive summary to this entire bill. It is basically creating regulatory frameworks for stablecoin issuers, aiming to protect consumers, ensuring financial stability, and promoting US dollar dominance globally. It does set out a lot of standards for reserves, audits, disclosures, and compliance with anti-money laundering rules, because it wants to address a lot of concerns around illicit activity use. Now, something about this bill, what I find very fascinating, is the reserve requirements. Now, stablecoin issuers must be backed one for one with liquid assets such as US dollars, short-term treasury bills, what I find incredibly fascinating, and other highly liquid instruments. It does also touch on restrictions for this bill, specifically around stablecoins, obviously, from being marketed as legal tender, and also it does ban yields or interest payments to individuals who are holding stablecoins, because this would massively undermine the entire banking sector. Something what I have been highlighting for months now, absolutely months, is the relationship between stablecoins, the national debt, and the Treasury, and why I think the administration would push through stablecoins first rather than anything else. And I was basically highlighting this months ago. And the reason for that is because stablecoins can be one of the largest buyers of the US Treasuries, and this was basically reduce the yields on the bonds. And this is something what we were talking about in our previous video in regards to the yield curve, about obviously the, let's say, the inverted yield curve, about how you could basically get it back to normal. And this is how you could do this. You could basically do it through stablecoins, and I think it is a very interesting way to reduce the interest payments. And the reason why this is incredibly fascinating is because it would allow you to refinance the national debt at cheaper yields, what ultimately would make it a lot easier to finance the national debt. Now, to give you some background just in relation to stablecoins in relation to other countries, Tether was the fourth largest buyer of US Treasury bills in 2024. They were the largest buyer outside of Singapore, Canada, Mexico, Israel, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and United Emirates. Now, with this new framework, just imagine how much US Treasury bills Tether could buy as a result of this framework, or let's say Circle or whoever. There is other concerns as well around stablecoins and CBDCs. Now, there is other acts or bills what are currently being passed, what is all in relation to the United States not necessarily endorsing a CBDC. You could speculate that stablecoins, specifically Tether or Circle, could be disguised as CBDCs. I mean, that is a whole other debate, what I might do a video on, but I just want to highlight, obviously, the impact of stablecoins on the national debt. Now, if we get to the national debt, this is a table of the maturity of the debt every single year, and it is showing the maturity and how much the Fed currently holds as well. We roughly have about 40% of the national debt what needs to be rolled over onto new rates. Now, I'll put the rates on the screen now, so you can basically see, I mean, we're roughly about 4%, 4.5% on the 10-year. If a lot of this debt gets rolled over onto 4.5% or 4% or 5% or whatever, it is very unsustainable, and we are basically in a debt spiral. If stablecoins became one of the largest buyers of US Treasuries, they could reduce the yields, what ultimately would reduce the yields on the short end. And this is the reason why I think the reserve requirements, specifically around short-term duration Treasury bills, is very fascinating, because it would basically be one of the largest buyers of the short end of the yield curve, and this would significantly relieve a lot of the national debt for the US government. Now, something what I want to just play as well. I'll play a recent interview from Scott Benson's, who is basically advocating for stablecoins just in regards to the Treasury. So I'll play that now.
Because crypto, that seems to be a threat to the dollar, doesn't it?
I think it's the opposite.
Oh, really?
I think stablecoins could reinforce dollar supremacy, because with stablecoins could end up being one of the largest buyers of US Treasuries or T-bills.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden, if you are using a stable coin in Nigeria that's backed by the US dollar, you don't actually have to have dollars. It's on your phone. You can transact. So I think there's a very good chance that crypto is actually one of the things that locks in dollar supremacy.
And is that why it was crucial that Donald Trump get involved in crypto rather than trying to constrain it like Joe Biden was?
I think constrain's too mild a word. I think make it extinct.
Oh.
So this administration's commitment to digital assets, it's innovation because there's so many other things that happen around digital assets. And also, it's one of those things that it's one of the most important phenomena that's happening in the world. And the U.S. just ignored it.
Mm.
And what we are doing, the very good bill that may get voted in the Senate next week after, that will bring crypto and digital assets and make the U.S. the leader. So just as we're the leader in AI, just as we are the leader in biomedicine, we will become the leader in this on the technology side. And here, led by Treasury, led by some great leadership in the Senate. And this is bipartisan.
So as you can see, I've been waiting to play this video for quite a while. But Scott is a very, very big advocate of stablecoins. Now, I think a lot of the reasons why this could not necessarily be discussed a few months ago is because you do not necessarily want to be showcasing the plan of action to your enemies or other countries or other nations or whatever you want to call it. And I also just want to reiterate Scott's background, because I think a lot of people really misunderstand who Scott Bessent is. And Scott was the lead macroeconomics analyst for Soros Fund. And the reason why this is incredibly, incredibly fascinating to understand is because in 1992, Bessent was the leading member who basically shorted the British pound, and he made over $1 billion. Now, he also bet against the Japanese yen in 2013, and he made 1.2 billion in profit in 3 months. And again, this guy understands currency markets, he understands the bond markets, he understands macroeconomics. And to think that he does not understand what he is doing, I just think is incredibly, incredibly naive. I am so happy that he has figured out about stablecoins. I mean, the thing is, obviously me just highlighting it, it's not like he's watching DC Economics, is it? And obviously being like, well, you know what, that's a pretty cool idea. I think he's very much ahead of the curve just in relation to what this could be or mean for the US Treasury market, and ultimately it would allow them to refinance a lot of this debt at cheaper rates if stablecoins, or when stablecoins, obviously buy the short end of the yield curve. Now, something else what I found very, very interesting is that today, what is the 21st, there's 82 billion, $73 billion worth of treasuries up for auction, and this auction went very, very well. And this is just something what I think you should be paying attention to as well. And this is just the upcoming Treasury auctions. So obviously the Treasury is issuing auctions on different types of duration, and how these auctions go, I think, is a very telling sign just in relation to the appetite of investors, just in regards to purchasing US debt. Now, something else what I keep getting asked a hell of a lot about is just in regards to the Fed. But my opinion on why I keep saying that the Fed should keep rates elevated, and the reason for that is because when you keep rates elevated, it massively destabilizes a lot of other economies, specifically around Asia and specifically around Europe and obviously South America as well. When you have rates elevated, it basically pulls liquidity back to the dollar or back home. What I think is currently happening is that you want to force alignment back to the dollar or back to the United States, because at the moment it's up for debate, right? But there's a lot of, let's say, countries who seem to be more aligned with China than the United States. So you could basically force that action in the bond market by keeping rates elevated, what would massively cripple their economies from a financing perspective. And then they would have to they would basically have to liquidate a lot of their assets. That can be treasuries, that can be gold, that can be Bitcoin, that can be whatever, to basically stabilize their own domestic economies. Now, something what I find very interesting, I'll put it on the screen now so you can basically see it, but this is just in relation to the UK. I mean, the UK is debating about selling its Bitcoin holdings. I find this very, very, very fascinating because the UK has a crippling debt market at the moment, or UK gilt market. there's a lot of things going on in the UK. We're not going to get into the ins and outs of absolutely everything, but with the United States keeping rates elevated, it can pull a lot of liquidity back to the US, because a lot of these countries who are indebted to the United States have to pay back that debt. Obviously, if you have a lot of troubles at home, you have to sell your assets to stabilize your own economies. And obviously, you selling Bitcoin, you selling gold, you selling US Treasuries, that's probably not necessarily what you want to be doing, but you are forced to do it through the through being in financial pain. And I think this is something what the administration is fully aware of. And now, just going back to Scott's background, I think Scott fully understands all of this, what I'm basically talking about. And now I'll play an interview now from Scott, what was aired about 3 or 4 weeks ago on Bloomberg. And I think some of the commentary is very, very fascinating.
I think the president was getting frustrated with the EU. The problem with EU, I've said several times, they have a collective action problem. There are 27 countries. They all have different needs. The Germans, they are interested in cars, the French in agriculture. And then you have Brussels negotiating with them. Now, I am very impressed. I met my German counterpart, who's part of the new German government, the German finance minister in Banff, that he was very responsive. I think that the new Chancellor, Merz, is going to give a opportunity for a U.S.-Germany reset. So I'm very optimistic that perhaps Germany can help push the EU forward here.
Let's talk for a moment about something you know terribly well, have lived it in your professional life, which is the markets. The bond market hasn't necessarily stood up and applauded with what they've seen out of Congress. Is the bond market wrong?
Well, I think the notion that in any movements in the bond market are being driven by the action of Congress is what's wrong. First of all, this has been a global phenomenon. That the Japanese yields have moved substantially, German, UK, and David, if we go back and look, since either the beginning of the year or January 20th, when the Trump administration came in, the U.S. 10-year is the only yield that is lower today. So, all yields are up. And again, I think that was a coincident indicator. The market's very good at latching on to a story. So I'm not particularly worried about what the market's thinking, because, on the other hand, what the market also could be thinking is that this bill is going to create growth.
Now, as you can see, Scott seems to be a little bit irritated, or the administration seems to be a little bit irritated with Europe. You could force a lot of this action, obviously with tariffs, with the bond markets, etc., to get people more aligned with your policies and with everything what you are basically proposing. But like what I keep reiterating, the bond market is very, very, very important. Now, if you do push legislation for stablecoins, and you are obviously doing negotiations for tariffs, and for example, let's say you have another push towards tariffs again in August or September or whatever, and you scare the stock markets, I think there's a lot of things what are lining up where you'd have a lot of domestic stress in Europe, in Asia, and you could create some type of credit event what basically would flush the stock market down and obviously everybody back into US Treasuries. Now, again, what I'm basically talking about is I'm kind of speculating really, because it depends on how well, let's say, stablecoins can be in regards to being a large buyer of US Treasury bills. But ultimately, in my opinion, I do think that some type of event does need to happen, and you can basically see it's like a coiled spring, or it's like pushing a ball underwater. It's like the more you push the ball underwater, the more the ball obviously wants to come to the surface. And I think that is very much the case with the type of stress what we're currently seeing in China. Obviously, what I've been highlighting in regards to the CNY, CNH spread. Obviously, the yields in Japan. A lot of things what are going on in the UK, specifically around the UK gilt market. Obviously, what is going on in Europe. There's a lot of civil unrest in Europe as well, what obviously has its own debates, what we can obviously talk about. But again, I think this is very, very important for the United States to basically get the realignment back to the United States, and most importantly, everybody gets back into the US bond market. Now, I do think a lot of these variables can massively help the United States to ultimately build and manufacture back in the US rather than obviously building in China, and having a lot of stress in Europe and Asia, I think is just like a coil spring, like basically what I'm trying to highlight. There's a lot of moving parts as well, but I think we'll probably see summer out of the way, and then we'll probably see let's say more discussions or more hikes or more whatever you want to call it, really, more drama just in regards to tariffs, because we are probably coming out towards the end of the 90-day pause on China. So, towards the back end of the year, depending on where the yields are, depending on where the stock market is, and obviously this, let's say, pocket aces in your back pocket, just in regards to stablecoins, I think you could theoretically push the market down and obviously drive people back into the long end and the short end of the yield curve, and obviously using stablecoins as well, I think would be a very, very, very good tool. But anyway, this is all just speculation, and yeah, there's a lot of people who've recently subscribed, so I really do appreciate you being here. And if you do have a question about anything, please let me know in the comment section down below. And to 4,500 people who keep on supporting me, I hope you're having a lovely day, and take care. Bye bye.